Hello and welcome back to the Cineskinny. It's the film podcast from the Skinny magazine. A very quick introduction from me and Jamie today because Jamie has been speaking to the excellent filmmaker Mark Jenkin about his new film. It's called The Rose of Nevada. Jamie, confirm all these details, please.
These details are all correct.
Wonderful. See, the thing is, that's efficient. This is a good, efficient introduction ahead of a very interesting conversation about this new film, which we did talk about on the GFFF. GFFF? See, the efficiency's all gone. Now that I've said it, it's all gone to pot. GFF preview episode when we watched this one that has Callum Turner and George Mackay as a pair of fishermen in a kind of like meta thingy. What's the phrase?
Time travel?
Time traveling. That's it, Jamie. Thank you very much. A kind of like, metaphysical time traveling drama, which blends bits of sci-fi and Mark Jenkin's favourite thing, Cornish fishing villages. But yeah, you chat to him at Glasgow. What was he saying?
Yeah, he's a good lad. We chatted about a lot of stuff. We had about half an hour, I think. We chatted about his style of filmmaking, where he uses these kind of hand-cranked Bolex cameras that's like usually hand-processed, and basically looks like it's been unearthed from like Soviet era, like Eisenstein time. So yeah, he is one of the most interesting kind of filmmakers to emerge out of the UK in the last few years, just because his films are so distinct and unusual. And I think crucially they're distinct and unusual, but they're also quite like accessible and good. Yeah, and I'd say this is probably his most accessible. You know, like you say, it is a high concept idea, a time travel movie, and he's got a couple of big stars in it, George Mackay and Callum Turner. So we chatted about that, chatted about casting those guys, how they adapted to his quite singular filmmaking style. Yeah, it was a good chat. He talked about his influences. He talked about Glasgow. He said he'd been shooting some footage around Glasgow. Maybe that's going to turn into a project in a few years. Nice. I'm excited. I love Mark Jenkin. He's great. And he's always wearing a lovely hat. So that's a nice little touch. Nice little bit of detail. If you want to hear more from Mark Jenkin, actually, once you listen to this interview, he is doing a big tour around the UK with Q&As after preview screenings of The Rose of Nevada. So in the following days after the release of this episode of the podcast, he's going to be in Cardiff, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle. He's going to be at the Cameo in Edinburgh next Tuesday, 21st of April. Belfast, loads of places in London. He's apparently going to have to get from from Bloomsbury to the Barbican in an undetermined amount of time. So I hope that the underground's all running fine. Yeah, more stuff that kind of launch weekend. Then Brighton, Lewes, Plymouth, and finishing up in Dartington, which is either a spelling mistake on the BFI's Instagram or a place I've not heard of before. I mean, I don't know where half these places. Where's Lewes? Lewes is on the south coast. Oh. Lewes is like Mark Jenkin country. Okay. That'll be a rabid, that'll be a hometown crowd. They'll be letting off pyro in the back of the cinema and everything. And then for more Mark Jenkin fun, I wanted to get this in the intro. Filmhouse are doing 35mm screenings from film as intended of all three of Mark Jenkin's features in May. So they've got Rose of Nevada from 35mm on the 9th of May. Bait, his excellent, like you say, Eisenstein style fishing drama, is on Saturday the 16th, and then Ennis Main, his kind of like folk horror, is on Sunday the 17th of May. And not the right order. That's kind of annoying. Well, in completely the wrong order. Like the one order that's not anything. And also weirdly, they're all on at 6:10 in the evening. Very strange. I mean, that's a good time. I mean, it's a good time, but it just seems odd that they'd all be on at exactly the same time. It means you've got time to have a good chat about it after dinner. Yeah. Speaking of time, I feel like this intro's run to... I feel like we've wasted enough of these people's time. Let's get this interview on. Okay. Right, cool. Here comes Mark Jenkin. Jamie, I will see you shortly. I can see you right now. I'll see you next week for the podcast. Yes, you will. Right, here's Mark Jenkin. Bye. So I just wanted to start, Mark, with how the film opens. You know, you open with like so much kind of dankness and decay. You know, we get this montage of this rusting boat and this kind of crumbling dock. And it seems to me that those details aren't just for atmosphere. You know, it seems to me that, you know, those details in your film tell the story as well, as much as the dialogue, as much as the characters.
Yeah, I think so. I think you can tell a lot about people or a place in the detail. And a fishing place like that, even if it's highly functioning and profitable, it's still dirty and rusty and, you know, used and in use. When you add an element of dereliction into it, it becomes something even more than that. And I always do that in all my films. There's that detail in the close-ups. And I think with this one, it was always going to be the opening of the film. It was so taken for granted that I didn't actually shoot it. we didn't shoot it during principal photography. So all of those close-ups at the beginning of the film, pre-Ed Rose boots arriving in the shot, every shot before that is shot in my local harbour, quite near to the end of the edit. So I'd almost finished the edit. So like 6-7 months after the shoot, I suddenly realised I haven't got all of the shots for the opening sequence, which were going to be the beginning of the film with titles running over the top of them. So they were going to be like background plates, really. So I quickly ran down to my local harbour and in about 20 minutes filmed all of those shots just from what was down there. Came back, sent the roll off to Pinewood to be processed, and it came back a couple of days later, and I dropped all of those shots into the beginning of the film and then went to put the titles over the top of them, but then thought, actually, I don't want to cover these shots with anything, because like you say, they say so much so early on in the film that they're a kind of pure montage with no credits over the top and no titles over the top, and the titles happen before that. So that's how those came about.
And I think we're very much in a Mark Jenkin film. You know, you've got a very distinct style, but this film is also, I guess, it's fair to say, probably your most high concept film. You know, I feel like this might be the one that you actually maybe had a elevator pitch ready for it. You know, it's you know, it's got sci-fi elements. Can you talk about coming up with this premise?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of did have an elevator pitch. That when we were developing it, we didn't have was an elevator, because it was done in lockdown. And what happened was we were just about to get ready to shoot Ennismane, which was my previous film. So we'd done Bait, and that had been successful. And then we were in development or in pre-production on Ennismane. And then we had the pandemic and went into lockdown. And I needed to write something, needed to keep myself busy during the lockdown. And it seemed like a good opportunity to get a step ahead rather than filming Ennismane and then starting from scratch with another film. It felt like if I could get something written during the lockdown and then Ennismane, then we went and made Ennismane. When we'd finished Ennismane and I'd finished promoting it, I'd have a script ready to go on the next film, which in theory is all great, but I didn't actually have any ideas for a film. And also the pandemic and being in lockdown kind of, it robbed me of any ability to think about anything for more than a couple of seconds. You know, I spent most of the day, like a lot of people did, just sort of staring at the wall, wondering what was going on. But I did have the very opening scene of the film, after the montage of dereliction. I had the idea for that scene, which was a boat being found in a harbour early one morning that had been lost at sea 30 years before, with all hands going down on it. And I just had that as a scene, and I'd had it for years, but I didn't have a film to put it in, to attach it to. So while I was desperately trying to come up with a new idea, I said to Mary, my partner, I need to come up with a new script idea. And she said, have you got any ideas? I said, I've got nothing except for this one scene. And I pitched it to her, and she kind of pitched back what might happen next, and then I pitched back what might happen next there. And in one night, we really sort of carved out the idea of what the story would be. Not what it was about, not what the message of it was, or any themes running through it really, but just really the nuts and bolts of a sci-fi story, of a time travel story.
What was the elevator pitch? Is it too hot?
Well, actually, I think the elevator pitch is basically like the first half of the film, and I think what happened was that when we finished the film, a synopsis was put together by the salespeople, which really sort of gave away the time slip twist.
Yeah.
But and at first I was like, no, we can't do that. But then I started thinking, actually, if this film relies on that twist, then the film's no good. It's bigger than that.
Yeah.
And also during the lockdown, I did audio diaries for the film program that was on Film 4 at the time, and all through the pandemic, I did film diaries about writing this film, and I talked about the whole plot in my audio diaries while I was writing it. So it was kind of out there in the public domain anyway. So my elevator pitch became, a boat that was lost 30 years before in a storm of all hands is found in a harbour. Not everybody in the community appears to be completely unsurprised that the film has returned. They just take it as a good omen, decide to put it back into service with a brand new crew, go out, have an amazing trip, and when they come back, it's 1993 and they're mistaken for the original crew.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the first half of the film. But I think this film doesn't live or die by its narrative, so I'm quite happy sort of explaining it like that. And it's an elevator pitch if I say it as quick as I just said it, else I'd have to abbreviate that a little bit, I think.
Well, one thing about the film that might make it, I guess, more commercially viable than your other films. Oh, I'm saying that all your other films have done very well, but like you have two kind of familiar faces in this film. You're working with kind of two kind of well-known actors for the first time, really. What was it about George Mackay and Callum Turner that you thought made them sort of fit quite well into your world?
It was when I met them, and I just follow my gut, and I don't get them to read or audition or anything like that. You know, they're both established actors, so I can look at them on screen, I can see their work, and then I meet them, and then I just follow my gut. Originally, so we had Shaheen Baig, who's our casting director, put together lists of potentials for both roles, and George was on the list to play Liam, the character that Callum ended up playing. So I met George to consider him for that role, because when I wrote it, I thought Nick was significantly younger than Liam, and I knew how old George was, and I knew he was older than how the age I'd written Nick. So I met George for Liam. But as soon as I met him and got chatting to him, I thought, actually, this is Nick. He's got the energy of Nick. He's got this. He's got the soul of Nick. And actually, George can look much younger. He can play much younger, and he can play much older. You know, he's a very versatile actor in that way. So then I cast him as Nick, kind of there and then, at least in my head, in the meeting. And then I had to go. We went back to him and said, look, we want to offer you the part. We want to offer you the other part. And so he kind of read the script again himself and read it through the eyes of the other character and thankfully accepted. And then we had so I never really investigated the rest of the list for potential Nicks. And then because I thought I had a Liam in George, I now didn't. So then I went to that list, and me and Callum have got a mutual agent in Los Angeles, and they'd put Callum on, you know, put his name into the hat, and I saw Callum's name straight away, and it was the first name I'd gone to on the list, because I was like, I remember Callum from an E4 series called Glue that I'd watched a few years after it had come out, but I'd watched it for another actor. There was something else I was doing, and I'd been told to watch Glue for somebody else in it. And I remember saying to Mary at the time, you know, this other actor who was great, and that film didn't happen, but I remember saying to Mary about Callum, I was saying, that guy, you know, this like brooding, stable lad. And I remember saying to Mary, he is brilliant. He's a movie star trapped in a TV program. He is, there's something about him. So when his name turned up, I was like, yeah, I'll meet with Callum. You know, before anybody else, I'll meet with Callum, because I really wanted to meet him. So we met, and I hadn't really seen much of what he'd done between Glue and now, because he'd done sort of, you know, he'd done the high profile stuff, was like the Harry Potter stuff, which I hadn't seen. So I quickly tried to watch as much as I could before meeting him, and then I had a meeting with him, and I said, yeah, I'm a big fan. I've seen everything. And he said, oh, have you seen Masters of the Air, which was the thing that he'd just done for Apple TV? And I was like, oh no, I haven't seen that one, because I didn't have Apple TV. And he was like, it was clearly that was the thing he wanted me to have watched. So we met and we chatted for about an hour and a half, and we just chatted about football, really. Okay. and some films, but certainly not my films or the script. And then we went our separate ways, and because we hadn't really talked about the film, we arranged to meet again. In the meantime, I got an Apple TV subscription and watched Masters of the Air, which again isn't necessarily something that I'd watch, but I thought he was absolutely incredible. And him and Austin Butler together, I just thought were amazing. And then I watched the press tour that they did for that series. And then you get a bit of an insight into the person if you watch, because they're sort of in a professional context, but they're not acting or not acting as much as if they're on the screen. So I just really sort of thought Callum was fantastic. And again, I always listen to my gut. So we met up again, and again we didn't really talk about the film too much. And then we were in London wandering around, and we had to go separate ways. And he was like, I said, oh, we haven't talked about the film. And he was like, yeah. I said, do you want to do it? And he said, yeah. I was like, okay, cool. And then that was it. So there wasn't a complicated casting process. It's just, I meet with people, I don't get them to read, and then I follow my gut if I can see them in those characters. And originally I cast the two of them because I thought they're so different. They didn't know each other. They'd met once in passing, but they didn't know each other. And I thought they're so different. Their personalities are completely different. And then as I got to know them in the build up to the shoot, I started realizing actually they're very similar The surface is different, but just below the surface, they become very similar. And that was really interesting, because then I started thinking, are my two characters more similar than they appear on the surface? To the point in the edit, at some points when I was cutting scenes, I was thinking, actually, there could be two halves of the same person here. And they're certainly mirrors of each other at times. They kind of switch positions at key points in the films. And that was through them. That's what they brought to it.
And they've both got really interesting faces, and I think you could probably say that to all of your cast. You really sort of seem to, I guess, because you use so many close-ups and, so much of the film plays out on faces.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier. Everybody's got an interesting face. That's the beauty of the human face, is that they're all beautiful. They're all amazing. And I think people say, people sometimes talk about like classic Hollywood or the silent era and say, oh, these beautiful silent film stars, or, these matinee idols, as if we're not beautiful anymore. But we're as beautiful as we always were. And in fact, a lot of times we're more beautiful because we eat better and we drink more water, and we have people who look after us, if we're actors, we have people who look after our skin and put our makeup on and make sure our hair looks nice and all that. We're as beautiful as we ever were. Films are not as beautiful as they were. That's the problem. I shoot a lot of close-ups. I love close-ups because you get so many free production values shooting close-ups, whether it's an inanimate object or whether it's somebody's face. When an actor turns up, they bring their face with them, and that's a huge production value. And people don't use them enough. Somebody, like Greta Garbo or somebody like that, who's under contract at a studio, you shoot the hell out of her face because that's what sells the movie. That's what's beautiful. And you do it very carefully. You shoot it through a gauze or whatever, and you light it. Those stars had their own camera operators who knew the structure of the face and who could get the most out of it. And I think we've lost that to a certain extent, because quite often we shoot these muddy mid shots that are not lit for the camera. They're lit for post-producing a look a long way down the line. Whereas I like to shoot big close-ups, and I like to light quite often with direct light as well.
And I'm just wondering how those actors coped with your style, because I guess it is a bit different from what they're probably used to. I'm just thinking of George Mackay being in that 1917, where is almost the opposite of your film, which is using these kind of big fancy tracking shots. So like, how did they work with your kind of more kind of like, I guess, staccato, broken up filmmaking? Yeah,
well, I think for that example of George, I think's right. You couldn't get a more different way of shooting a film than the way that Sam Mendes shot 1917 and the way that I shot my film. But in another way, they're exactly the same. They're both kind of formalist films, where the form is as important as the content. So I think George would be incredibly constrained in what he could do in 1917, and that's where the innovation comes from, and that's where the excitement and the experimentation comes from. And the way that I try and work with very strict limitations that engender a kind of experimentation and try and create something a bit new. And both George and Callum are, they're artists and they're cineasts. They both watch a lot. They both know a lot about the industry. They know about the culture of cinema. They know the history of cinema. So they want to work with people who are working in different ways. And that's not to say that I didn't have a bit of fear when they turned up, that I had to kind of pretend that I was a more conventional filmmaker than I was. But what I did straight away in the rehearsal room before we started shooting, I brought the camera into the room and just said, this is the center of the film. The camera is the center of the film. The cast, the actors are the most important people. The most important thing about filmmaking for me are the actors, but the key thing to making the film is the film, because the film, the only thing the audience sees is what goes through the camera. So I'd never kind of set up a scene with actors and block it out as if it was a piece of theatre and then settle on that and then decide where to put the camera. I would come into a location with a specific lens that I was going to shoot on in a specific location that it's got its lighting or sort of geometric constraints, and I would put the camera in a position I wanted it to be, and then I would talk to the actors and say, this is the limitations that you're going to work within. So you're not going to be able to move there. You're going to have to hit that mark, or not even hit that mark. You're going to have to stay on that mark, and then they can get creative within those constraints. And I think, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they were both excited to try something new. And I think both, if you look at both of their filmographies, they're both wanting to work with different people. They both want to try something new. On the first day, George wasn't on the call sheet. He wasn't required on the first day. I was shooting stuff with Callum and with Roz and Francis. And George came to me the night before and said, "Do you mind if I just come along to have a look what's going on?" And he turned up and he just stayed the whole day and just observed and wandered around. And, and so in that way, again, I followed my gut with casting them because I knew they would be team players. And I knew, and they expressed it as well. They wanted to see how these films were made. They were intrigued by the idea that there was this close sort of almost family unit making films at down on the extremity of the island. And and they bought into it brilliantly.
I also want to ask about this film's connection to your other two, and especially Bait, because it seems to me both films are very much talking about, this is a time travel film, but it's also talking about Cornwall today and sort of the state of, I guess, the socio-economic issues happening there. So do you see them working in parallel, those two films?
Yeah, I think so. I'm always the last to notice the connections between them because I'm so deep into it. But, people have said that this film feels like a bit of a combination of Bait and Ennis Main, the sort of supernatural element or borderline sci-fi element of Ennis Main with the social realism of Bait. So I think maybe I'm gradually realising what I'm doing with each film, sort of one film late. But yeah, I think the comment on contemporary Cornwall is there, and the more I screen it with an audience, and the more people reflect back what they think the film is about, and the amount of questions about whether it's a political film or whether it's a social commentary. And I think with this one, I inadvertently fell into a way of showing what maybe we've lost in the space of a single generation, so 30 years, and doing that from starting in the present day with a Cornish street that's got a food bank on it that nobody would bat an eyelid at. Of course there's food banks, Why would the sixth biggest economy in the world not have food banks everywhere? Why would MPs not go along and proudly open food banks? But they're there, we've got food banks and the public toilets are closed and the banks are gone. And that's it's very difficult to highlight that without being sort of didactic and prescriptive with it and say, look, this is a food bank, and have a character saying, isn't it a disgrace that there's a food bank, or, the sort of stuff that I've just said. But if you start in the present day with a food bank and then you jump back simply one generation, 30 years to the mid-90s, which certainly somebody my age doesn't seem that long ago, and to actually see that food bank was a pristine post office in the heart of a community, then the audience on a sort of maybe a subconscious level, unconscious level, recognises in the background to the story that's going on, oh yeah, look at what we lost, which we never talk about until it's kind of too late.
Yeah.
So I think with all my films, I want to create an authentic context to set a specific story in that can be universal, and to create that authenticity, then I look through a camera and look around and see the state of the world. I just walked down to, through the city, down to the river a minute ago, and it's all there. The past, the present, and future are all there. And I've got a camera with me, so I was taking images where you've got the old industrial there. Then you've got a pile of rubble, which is something that's been demolished. It was probably from the 80s or something. That's so like the industrial past is preserved and celebrated. The stuff from the 70s is demolished and ground down into nothing, and then shiny glass blocks are built. And I haven't got a comment on that because it's complicated, and that's economics. But I've taken some photos that when I get developed, I hopefully captured the past, present, and future all in one photograph. And there's a bit of time travel.
Wow, I'd love to see your take on Glasgow, because obviously you're so associated with Cornwall, but yeah, well,
I've got a Super 8. I shoot Super 8 wherever I go, so I've spent 2 days wandering around looking at things. And this afternoon, when I got a bit of free time after the screening, I'm going to go out with my Super 8 camera and shoot half a roll around Glasgow.
Well, look out for that. Short film, maybe.
Yeah, a couple of years time.
Yeah. I think we're running short of time, but I just want to ask about your influences, because obviously your filmmaking is very unique. Very kind of instantly recognizable. But I'm just wondering, who are your kind of like influences? Who are the filmmakers that you look up to or kind of studied growing up?
I think that the two people that I think about all the time are Bresson and Nick Rogue. Bresson is always the voice in my head that's saying keep it simple. I'm sure if Bresson was around and was watching my films, he'd hate them because of the temporal jumping around and the what might be perceived as a bit of tricksiness within the edit, but I've always got the voice of Scorsese talking about Bresson in my head. Whenever I'm in a flap on the shoot and I can't work out what to do, I always hear Scorsese saying a quote that I'd read of him saying, whenever I don't know what to do, I think of Bresson saying, keep it simple.
Yeah.
And the other person, Nick Rogue, who, I mean, I just love the way he portrayed time on screen and the interior and the exterior of the mind on screen. I think he was a master who truly understood the potential of cinema and was constantly pushing the form forwards and quite often failing, but gloriously failing, and sometimes in failure pushing the form forward in even more than when he was kind of successful with it. So the two of them, and then there's there's plenty of other filmmakers I've been watching. I really love Kelly Reichardt. I don't know why she just popped into my head. It's because we were talking about Wendy and Lucy earlier, and I've just programmed Wendy and Lucy for a season that I'm doing, and I think she really simplifies the filmmaking process in a way. I tried to say it in the Q&A last night. I was like, filmmaking is so easy, and I think do I sound so arrogant and flippant and naive and totally unaware to say that? But the actual mechanics of making a film is so easy. You don't need many people. You just need a camera and something to point the camera at. Capturing the lightning in the bottle of making a film that's successful and works, I don't know how to do that. But the actual mechanics of making a film is so easy, and we really overcomplicate it. And quite often I'll look at Kelly Reichardt, who's got this, I don't know her, but seems to have this amazing life where she teaches and then she makes films, and she makes films in such a simple way. And she just, I think through the simplicity and through the lack of bullshit around her filmmaking, she just connects with humanity every time. There's always something there that just makes you see the world in a slightly different way, or educates you in a little way about the way we act and the way we rub along together. So the more work of hers I see, the more of an influence I think she is.
The one film that maybe I saw, I definitely saw some Rogue and Bresson as well, like especially the way you collapse time, and there's a bit of performance maybe in the way the two characters were overlapping a little bit. Yeah,
well, I screened performance the other day. We presented it at our cinema and our local cinema, and put it. I introduced it, and we had a discussion about it afterwards. And I always think performance is the one that's got every idea under the sun in it, but I've never worked out a link between performance and any of my films. There's more obvious ones, like people have always flagged up Don't Look Now and stuff, but yeah, I suppose vice and versa.
Yeah. I guess that's got Donald Cammell involved, so that's maybe changing the equation a little bit. Yeah. But I was also going to say the other film that I was thinking about was Jaws. It's these three men in a boat, and my favourite scenes in Jaws are those three men sort of bickering in the hull.
Yeah, somebody said to me in Dublin earlier this week, they said this was their favourite maritime film since Jaws, and they said to me, you were obviously a massive Jaws fan, and I think Jaws is one of those films that I never think of myself as being a fan of, because it's just Jaws. Who's not a fan of Jaws, I suppose. And there was two things that I thought about whilst making Rosa Nevada that related to Jaws. One, we were on the way out to film at Hale, and I was on the camera boat, and we were following the hero boat out. And at Hale in Cornish means estuary, so people call it Hale Estuary, but that actually means estuary. But the estuary that leads out from the harbour goes out, sort of winds out through these white sandbanks, and it was the middle of summer holidays. It was full of kids running around and colourful windbreaks and people all around, and we were winding out on this boat, and a lot of the crew were on the boat. So the actors were on the boat, the ADs were on the boat, the stills photographer was on the boat, we had a gaffer on the boat, I was on the camera boat following, and everybody was stood on the deck as we were going out. And I thought, this looks like that scene in Jaws, when the flotilla goes out to hunt the shark, Martha's Vineyard, the white sand, and it looked like white sand where we were. And I thought, wow, that looks like Jaws. And we've got some stills of that, and some video, and it looks kind of incredible. The other thing was that after the storm, when the three of them are sat below deck in their underwear, that was a dialogue scene, and we shot it as a dialogue scene, and there was a lot of dialogue in that scene. And then in the edit, I suddenly became aware, what's this reminding me of? And I thought, this is the Indianapolis scene, and I don't want this scene to make people think of that scene, which is the amazing Milius dialogue, the monologue, all of that. I don't want people to pop out of my film and start thinking about that film. So I cut all of the dialogue out of the scene. So the scene you now see below deck after the storm is all the reaction shots. And it worked. Once I took dialogue out, it was great, because they're all sort of, they're communicating with each other through looks, but that was shot as a, they were all the reaction shots to the dialogue. So that was an influence in a kind of inverse way. It was like, I don't want this scene, I don't want people to be thinking of Jaws when they're watching the scene. So Jaws was definitely present. Not the shark, but the film.
Well, it reminded me of it. I think that's probably all the time we've got, but it was a really good chatting to you. And maybe just finally, do you know what you're doing next? Do you have, it feels like these 3 films, like we say, are kind of speaking to each other almost as a trilogy. Do you see yourself moving away in a different direction, or do you see yourself continuing and building on these 3?
I suppose a little bit. I hadn't really thought of them as linked, but they're kind of being, and all 3 films have been this BFI distribution are distributing this one as they did Ennis, Main and Bait. So the BFI have started referring to them as the Cornish trilogy, which I really like, which does feel like a bit of punctuation. It's like, right, that's the Cornish trilogy done, and that does give me not the freedom, because I've got the freedom to do whatever I want. Might not get financed, but I got at least got the freedom to write whatever I want. But I think in my head it's gone, okay, that's those 3 films. Now this is the next bit of my career. So I've got 4 things. I've got a road movie that I'm writing myself. I'm working with a couple of writers in New York for a film that's set still in the UK. I'm going to adapt a book, and I'm working with another writer on a much bigger movie. So I've got 4 things, and I've never had that many things going simultaneously, which is why I'm working with a few writers and collaborating on stuff, because I don't want to, like Bait, Ennis, Main and Rosa Nevado's take, because I write them and I do a lot of the post-production, and I also love going out and doing the promotion. What we're doing now is actually my favourite part of the filmmaking process. It kind of takes, it's like a 3-year cycle, and I just want to speed it up a little bit. I'm 50 in a couple of weeks, and I've suddenly started thinking that maybe I should be making a film every 2 years rather than 3.
Well, it seems so labour intensive, working with the Bolex and all these little camera setups. Are you going to stick with the Bolex as well?
If it's appropriate, I will. There'll be times when it maybe won't be appropriate, but I'm not going to change the way I'm working for arbitrary reasons. I still love working in the way that I work. I've devised a way of working that really excites me. I get up in the morning excited to make films, so I don't want to throw that away. And maybe one day I'll think, I want to do something in a different way, but not at the moment. I love being across it all. And although it is labour intensive, in some ways it's slower, but in other ways it's quicker, because I can just get on with it. And I love getting on with stuff. I'm impatient, and I think the older I get, the more impatient I'm going to get.
Well, I didn't go to the screenings, but I believe you had 2 sold out screenings at Glasgow Film Festival, so it seems like the audiences also love what you're doing. So maybe
they bought tickets, but I don't know. I don't know what they thought of it.
Yeah. Well,
I've been reading. I'm a bit addicted to reading letterbox reviews, so I do. I know what some people think. So, but it's been great. It's been positive.
I think it's been positive.
There's been a lot of love for the film.
It seems like people like it.
Yeah. Long may it continue.
Exactly. Well, best of luck. We take it on tour in April.
Yeah, in April. I'll be around the country. Yeah.
And we look forward to seeing what you do next. And maybe this Glasgow film, if you
maybe I'll come back in one of the one of the inter years when I haven't got a feature film. I'll come back with a short.
Well, if you're into decaying and social economic problems, we've got plenty of it here as well. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right on.
Cheers.